friends, I'm so excited for who you get to meet today. I'm sitting here with my real life friend, Meredith Boggs. Meredith, it is about time that we had you on Girls Night. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Meredith and I were just talking about, we both live in Nashville. And like I said, we're real life friends. We have not seen each other in a million years. And we were trying to figure out why that is. And then we were like, oh, we all lost a couple years just in life. And then she's a new mom, as am I. And so also we're like, we live in the same city, but we haven't been out in the city in a while. And so that's why we haven't seen each other in forever. So anyway, I'm so glad that we get to be here and catch up. And for women who haven't gotten to meet you yet, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and a fun fact about yourself?
Okay. Yes, I am Meredith Boggs. I am a born and raised Nashville girl. I do a couple different things. I'm an author. I have a book coming out in January, which has really been a lifelong dream. I just tell people, I'm a writer at heart. You kind of wear a lot of hats and do a lot of different things when you're in that world, but I'm just really a writer through and through. I also been a nurse. I have been in the medical field for 10 years now, which is wild. And got a background in ER, ICU, but I currently work in transport nursing as a critical care transport nurse. And I also, this is something I'm really passionate about that a lot of people don't know, but I helped start a program here in Nashville at Vanderbilt, a core group of sexual assault forensic nurse examiners to provide services to victims in the city. And so I also take call doing that. And I'm a wife and a mom, and being a mom is the best job ever. And it's also full-time plus. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. I've been married for 9 years now to Justin. I met him at middle school church camp. So girls just know that it happens. All those camp crushes. We didn't start dating until high school, but then we dated through high school and college and got married after. But a fun fact about myself, I had to think about this one. And a lot of people probably don't know this, but there was one point in my life that I was able to speak Mandarin conversationally. And it is long gone, but at one point I could. So, fun fact.
That is a great fun fact. That is amazing. It's so funny. The fun fact question is so tough. And I make sure, I send it in advance. And then I always check with people before. I'm like, okay, did you have a chance to think of your fun fact? Because everything else is cake. After you figure out what that is the hardest question to answer, but it's so fun. So
I know. I can only ever, I'm like, this isn't fun. This is boring or whatever. So I was so thankful that you said that early. It gave me time to think on it. And now I have this one in the bank for the next time someone asks me on the spot.
Yep. You have to have them in your back pocket.
Yes.
There was a minute there where I had any fun fact that would come to mind. I'd write it down and put it in my phone. But I don't know where that note is. So that doesn't help me at all. Okay. So you have this new book coming out. It's called The Journey Home, a biblical guide to using the Enneagram to deepen your faith and relationships. And I want to hear just more about the book. Tell us the backstory, tell us the book, just tell us about where this came from.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little bit about kind of what inspired it and then what the book is about. So I learned about the Enneagram first when I was in high school. I was in counseling at the time, and they used it just kind of as a framework to understand yourself better. And so I first learned about it then, loved it, found it really helpful in that season. I was in recovery for an eating disorder, and it was just a really helpful framework for personal growth and just understanding relational dynamics at just a really crucial age in life. And fast forward 10 years, I was in my mid-20s in a season of pretty intense burnout. We had actually just moved back from living overseas in China, which another fun fact is where I first stumbled across Stephanie. And I read the Lipstick Gospel on an overnight train. And I just remember being in that bunk reading, just devouring it on my Kindle. I loved it. But
that's my favorite. You and I met right when you got back. And I remember you telling me that story. And it just was the coolest. That is the power of a book that I got to be with you on that overnight train. It's just so cool.
I still remember that. It's so cool. And it's still so impactful. So actually it was right after that season of coming home, just really kind of frayed spiritually. Wasn't disconnected from my faith, but just feeling really stagnant, and it really stuck. Also just really intense burnout. And I was back in counseling in that season. The Enneagram kind of also reemerged during that time with this, it just overtook the world. And it was here's the Enneagram. Really, it's been around. It had been around for a long time, but it just really had a resurgence then. and was using it again in the counseling setting and was looking for a way to really integrate it with my spiritual life. But everything that I found felt really cerebral and it just didn't feel accessible. And that was really, I would say, where the desire for this book, I didn't even realize it at the time, but that's really where it started from. I wanted this resource for myself and couldn't find it. And so, anyways, that's kind of who the book is written for. It's really written for people who are kind of in two camps. One, that are really spiritually on the fringes, kind of feeling stale, stagnant in their faith, not really sure what's next, really do want to reconnect with God, but maybe they've experienced church hurt, or maybe they're just like in a season of their life. It's like, I don't know that I believe everything that I grew up being taught, and they're kind of trying to figure it out for themselves. And they've really connected with the Enneagram and are trying to figure out how that can possibly help them reconnect with themselves, with God, and with other people. And then the other camp that it's kind of written to is for Christians who love the Enneagram and they're kind of wondering, like, should I use this tool? If so, how can I use it? Approaching it with a biblical worldview. So a little bit more about the book. It outlines the 9 different types, and it really focuses on the sin tendency and the virtue of each type. So identifying strengths and weaknesses, identifying those sin tendencies, how you get stuck, how to break free from them, and then spiritual practices that are really just daily practical things that you can integrate into your life to grow spiritually. So yeah, that's a little bit about the book.
I love that. Tell us, so like you said, the Enneagram, I first came across the Enneagram in middle school, actually. I was part of this like lunch group with a school counselor with a bunch of my friends. I don't know why it started. I think that she was maybe trying to just like mentor us or something. I don't know. I don't know how I ended up in this group with my friends, but it felt exclusive and fun. And, we got to eat not in the cafeteria on Wednesdays. And, but she taught us about the Enneagram, and I remember that distinctly. And so when it came back around and like, caught fire, and, everyone started talking about it, I was like, oh my gosh, I remember this, and started to kind of dig into it again. So for women who haven't heard of the Enneagram, or who maybe have heard of it and are like, I don't know what that is, can you give us a refresher?
Yeah. So the Enneagram, it is a personality typing system similar to the Myers-Briggs, DISC, StrengthsFinders, any of those. The biggest thing that distinguishes the Enneagram from all the others is that it really focuses on the motivation that lies underneath the behaviors. And instead of focusing on behaviors, it's all about the motivation. And it's more, the other thing I love about it too, it's really more holistic in nature, and that it factors in things like experiences, emotions, these core beliefs, these core fears that you have. The other thing that I think really distinguishes it is that it's dynamic. And so as you dive into it more, you'll hear terms like your wing, or where you go in stress and security. And you have the ability, we're dynamic as humans. We're not stuck in one state all the time. Our circumstances can influence how we show up, our relationships. And so that's the other piece that the Enneagram really factors into, that is those seasons where you're under a lot of stress, seasons that are, not quite as stressful, where you're operating in a really healthy place. And so it takes into account all of that, which really sets it apart from the others.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of people who, like, if people don't love personality tests, they're like, I don't fit in a box. And no, like, we don't fit in a box,
Right.
But I feel like the Enneagram is more like a rhombus or something. Like,
Yes.
it's a slightly wigglier shape.
Yeah.
And so it's a way of putting for me, the reason that I loved it was because I was like, I react sometimes to situations like this, but then sometimes I'm like this. And like, I just didn't have language to explain how I felt or how I am in different circumstances. And so I love the Enneagram because it gives some language to it.
Yes.
And it gives language to different circumstances. So it's not like I am always very organized.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I tend to be organized because of this. Organization's not really part of it, but like, this is why. But then, when I'm really stressed out or really anxious, like I'm different, and we all are. And so it's kind of a filing system for some of the things that we're feeling and going through, but it's definitely wigglier and provides more room to move around than like putting yourself in a box.
Yeah. And even like you said there, that, that piece of like, well, normally I'm organized, but sometimes I'm not, but because it's that because piece. And it's like, that's where the motivation comes in. So it's like, yeah, you normally operate this way, but sometimes you don't. And it's because of, whatever the reason is. And so like you said, it is more wiggly. It's more dynamic. It allows that fluctuation, between different types, kind of different, really, and that's the behavior piece that we can see. We can see each other's behaviors, but we can't see, each person's motivation. And so that's the really cool piece, I think, about the Enneagram and understanding yourself and using it to connect with others more.
Yeah. So as we're talking about like what the Enneagram is good for and what it is,
Mm-hmm.
I also know it's important to talk about what the Enneagram is not.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
Yes. I think the Enneagram, it's not diagnostic. It's not the end all be all. It's not the gospel. You are not your type. And I'm really passionate about that because like you said, people hate being put in boxes. They don't like to be stereotyped. And the problem, what happens when we do that to ourselves or other people, if I put myself into a box and say, well, I'm just an 8, that's how I am, I'm just impatient, that gives me an excuse for my bad behavior. And that's not okay for me to be impatient. And likewise, if I look at my husband or a friend or something, I say, well, he's just a 3, that's how he is. I'll look at him like that. And I really box him into that. And I don't ever give him space to grow and evolve and change and become someone different. And so I think that's a really important piece to understand too, that it's not a label. It's not a box to put someone into. It's one of those things that I think it's a really helpful tool and a really helpful framework. And I tell people, I'm like, you know what, if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. Like move on and find what does work for you. But for a lot of people, they do resonate with it and it gives them language, like you said, for parts of themselves that they didn't previously have that language for.
Yeah. Tell us, I know that this is a big question with, a whole book or 1,000 full of answers, but can you give us just a quick rundown on the different types?
Yes. It is a big question, but that's one of the most commonly asked questions. So I've tried to get it down to where it's pretty concise.
I'm ready.
So type 1, you may hear them referred to as the reformer or the perfectionist. They are people of high ideals. They are very morally and ethically driven. They are the people of the world that keep the rest of us from morally careening off the side of a mountain. They keep us in check. Their default operating mode is integrity. They're constantly self-reflecting to see how they can better themselves. And that also spills over into other people. They're constantly assessing how other people can be doing better too. But it really comes from a good and sincere place. The type 2, they are known as the helper or the giver. And you're a type 2. Is that right, Stephanie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I am. Yep.
They are deeply loving, incredibly caring. They're profoundly compassionate people. They're warm and approachable, really just have a nurturing energy to them. They're like superpowers that they easily perceive the needs of others. And when they're living in a really good space, they are just the picture of biblical servanthood, with humility, just really generous with their time, with their love for other people. So 2s they're all amazing. I love them all. Every time I talk about this, I'm like, oh, I love this one so much. I love that one, but they're all so wonderful. Okay, type 3, they are known as
that has a downside. Just so I feel like that one was overwhelmingly positive, but
they're yes. And type 2s, a lot of times they self-forget. They just sacrifice themselves on the altar of other people, which is obviously not good. But they all have their downside. They all have their really positive qualities and strengths as well. But type 3s, they are known as the achievers or the performers. They are really driven and ambitious. They have an energy that's really infectious. They're champions for other people. They're very goal-directed, success-oriented. They really they kind of keep corporate America alive in a lot of good ways and also in some not so great ways. But when they are really living in a good space, they are really authentic and they bring hope to the world. They're true visionaries. And they're another just really, really wonderful type. Type 4s are the romantics. They might also be called the creatives. Some of these titles you'll hear a little bit different based on what teacher or what book you're reading. But they're original, introspective, true creatives, and they embody authenticity. There's nothing about a 4 that is inauthentic. They are really in tune with their emotions and with other people's emotions. And the unique thing about 4s is that they're the only type that's able to bear witness to pain and just sit with it. They're okay with the messy, the painfulness, and they don't have to medicate it. They don't have to do something to make it feel better. They don't say unhelpful, insensitive things. They just sit there and bear witness to it. And so that's something that's really, really unique about the fours. Type 5, the investigator. This type, they are constantly taking in information in the world. They are readers, they are thinkers, they are very perceptive, and they bring a really cool neutrality to each situation. They have this really unique ability to remain objective. And fives can tend to be a little bit more disconnected from their emotions, but that is one of the positives of that is that they do not get stuck in their emotions. They can really remain objective about things. But they are inventive, they're inquisitive, they ask open-ended questions, are really curious, wanting to learn, to gain knowledge and just more understanding. They're another type because of that emotion piece. They are really able to make decisions from knowledge and wisdom, again, rather from a place of emotion. Now, their work is to tap into their emotions and connect with themselves and others through that. But type 5s are also really amazing. Type 6, the loyalist, they're the type that they can be truly altruistic in the sense that they are really for the common good of everyone. There are some Enneagram theories that say 6s make up half the world. And I can totally see that because 6s really are the glue to society. They are committed. They don't jump ship. If a 6 ever quits their job or quits something, you can rest assured it took them months to come to this decision, if not years to come to it. But they show up, they stick it out. They're devoted, dependable, reliable, dutiful people. They are really fiercely protective, loyal. I mean, they are just the kind of friends that will stick with you to the end. So 6s they are fantastic. Type 7s are the adventurers, or they're called the enthusiast. I think that's the other name for them. They are playful, optimistic. They just have this wild enthusiasm that they approach life with. They're the life of the party kind of people. They like to keep their options open. They bounce from job to job. They're world travelers. They're always there for a good time. The thing about 7s I think that people miss is that they really bring joy to the world, like this deep cultivated joy that when 7s are able to sit with their pain and other pain, which is really hard for them to do, they are able to really embrace joy in their own life and in the life of others. And it's not some cheap imitation. It's really deeply rooted joy that's found in the contentment in life and in the goodness of what you've been given in the season that you're in, even if it's not everything that you wish that it was, or even if it's got some painful pieces to it. So that's the type 7. The type 8 is the challenger. They are strong, self-confident, really champions for justice. They're pretty independent, protective, passionate. They can be really boisterous. And they really just have this energy when they walk into a room. Again, their biggest thing is justice. And so they will champion that all day long. They are really the ones that if you have an 8 on your team, they've got the energy. So whatever the goal is, it's going to get done because they will make sure that it does. And then the type 9, they are known as the peacemakers. They are easygoing, just provide a really calming, reassuring presence. It's like you feel a sense of stability, like you can take a deep breath when they walk into a room. They really are true empaths. They sit at the top of the Enneagram, and a lot of people say that that's because they can see every other type and really truly empathize with what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they're needing. They're really supportive, genuinely loving people. But yeah, that's kind of the superpower of the 9 is that they're empaths. They're able to see what everyone else thinks and feels. So yeah, so that's kind of a quick overview of all the 9 types.
What are you?
I'm an 8 through and through. And we might get to this, but when I first took a test in high school, I actually typed as a 1. And that's also part of why I'm not a huge fan of tests. But I typed as a 1. And then when I started reading about it, I was like, oh my gosh, no, I'm an 8. It's like very apparent. And so I think tests are great. I think they can be really helpful, but don't always rely on a test because it's sometimes not the most accurate.
So that's exactly what I was going to ask is how do we, well, okay, before we get into that, I love the way that you described all of these types because I think sometimes when people like go through the list, it's like all the negative things. And that, but it really is like two sides of a coin, you know, and we all know this about ourselves. Like a lot of times our greatest strength also in a way is our greatest weakness, or, you know, kind of the flip side of it is our greatest weakness. And that's why the Enneagram, for me, has been so helpful because, you know, different personality tests will give you clues into what you're good at or what you like or what you're drawn to. But more for like in concrete ways, like having some language to identify what your superpower is a really great way to figure out where you can really impact the world. And, and it's not like you must do this job, but it's like, hey, you might really enjoy or thrive in a job where you get to fight for justice. You know, that's like, it's just kind of this filter or this compass.
It's but this then lens also, through which you can see yourself and others.
Yeah. But then also, you know, as you learn about each type and you learn about the things that are hard about that number, or like kind of the, like you're great in this way, but also this is a way that you might have some work to do. That gives us a place to start, you know, and a, like, kind of a path forward of, okay, I know you're right. I do really struggle with this, or, you know, this situation, I do show up like this and I wish I didn't, but I have some language for it. And when you can wrap some words around it, that's like a really important step to moving
it's
in a
huge.
positive direction.
It really is where a transformation starts, which is why it's so helpful.
Okay. So figuring out what type we are, one popular way is a test. And there are a handful. If you look up like Enneagram tests, there are a bunch, right? But like, talk us through, how do we figure out what we are?
So a test is definitely the most popular way. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of tests, but that is one of the most frequently asked questions is, what test did I take? So I do tell people there's one test that I recommend, and I do not get a commission off of it. So it's cost $12, but it is the best Enneagram inventory. It's called the Wagner Enneagram Personality Style Scales, or WEPS, WEPPS, WEPSS. And the reason that I like that one is because it's the only one that's actually been statistically validated. And so if you're like a little bit of a nerd in that way and you're like, I need something a little bit more objective than something someone just made up, that will give you that. It's endorsed by the Western Psychological Services. They sell it on their website. And so I think that also speaks to the credibility of it, that they wouldn't sell something that was just like made up. But the thing I like about that test is that, so for example, when I take that test, it scores you in every type. And so I normally score pretty high. Obviously, it's an 8, but I also score really high as a 3 and a 1. And so the reason I think that is so helpful is because you can take those scores and really use that as a jumping off point of like, oh, let me go dive into these 3 types and then figure out which one actually fits in terms of the motivation. You don't have to take that one. You can take another free test. But I just always caution people that whatever your test results say, really hold that with an open hand. The Enneagram actually started as an oral tradition and was like that for years. So really weren't tests to take until like the 60s or 70s. And so the whole testing piece is relatively new still. And so the way that people used to identify their type was through telling stories, was through talking about it with other people. Workshops are an amazing place to learn about it, or just hang out with other people, talking about what type they are, talking about what type you think you are. You really gain a lot of insight and understanding from talking about it, from reflecting, from self-assessing, instead of just simply taking a test. So again, tests are great. They can be really helpful, but I do think that another piece, and this is not like the most popular answer, but if you know that you're in a season of like really intense, like you're just not in a good season of life. Like you're like, I know that I'm not operating in a healthy space. I'm doing all the things that I don't like how I'm living right now. I think when we live like at the polar ends of like, I'm in a super healthy space or I'm in a super unhealthy space, those are really telling seasons, because again, all of our worst characteristics are going to be on display, or all of our best characteristics are going to be on display. And I think most of us live our life somewhere in the middle. We live kind of in this middle ground where sometimes we're in a good space, sometimes we're not, but we have these adaptive strategies that we've learned. And then there's things that come into play, like, you know, how you grew up. There's things like trauma that happens in our life that really complicates and confuses things. So I do think that tests are helpful in that sense. But I think ultimately reading about it, listening to podcasts, talking to other people about it will really help you. And then the other thing that I always tell people is be okay with mistyping. And it's okay if you think, oh, I'm an 8 and run with that for a while. And then you come back a year later and you're like, wait a minute, actually, no, I'm a type 1 because I really identify more with those motivations. Be okay with mistyping. There is a lot of freedom in that. Don't die on a hill over what type you are. Again, it's not the gospel. It's really helpful, but it's not the end all be all. So
That's just such a beautiful and essential part of any journey is like, wandering in one direction. And then it's only through wandering in that direction that you figure out you want to go in a different direction. And so
yeah,
you learn so much about, like, that's the point, is learning a lot about yourself. And so by walking down a road and going, I think I'm a 3. Oh, wait, I'm not a 3. I'm actually a
yes,
7. That journey is part of it. There's so much to be gained from
yes,
that.
absolutely.
Okay, so talk to me about relationships. I want to ask first just about our relationship with God. I love the
Mhm.
things that you said at the beginning about how the book, like the different people that the book is for. And so I'd
Mhm.
love to know, like, how can the Enneagram help us if we're in sort of a like lost or distant or kind of confusing spot with God?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for myself personally, it was one of those things that was like, I knew that I still loved God and I really valued my faith, but I was like, what do I do with it now? Like, I've experienced a lot of like the pain and the brokenness that the world has. And like, I still believe in his sovereignty and his goodness, but like, it is not like, this isn't fit, right? This doesn't feel good. I got to figure this out. And so I think the Enneagram, it offers a couple different, and this is where as you dive deeper into it, there's more layers. But for me, really understanding the sin tendencies specific to my type. So as a type 8, my sin tendency is lust, which is not like people think about lust in a sexual sense. It's really just like this general too muchness that you approach life with, of just like kind of like this ravenous, like gluttonous consumption, or just the way that you show up. It's aggressive, it's boisterous, it's just too much. It's not bridled, it's not metered, it's not wise, it's not it's not any of that. And understanding that was really helping me see where I was showing up in life in a way that was not healthy and that also was really not in alignment with who I wanted to be. And then, on the other end of that spectrum, understanding the virtue that I uniquely could bring to the world. So as a type 8, it's truth. It was like, oh, that is the gift that I bring, in this real drive for justice is a good thing if it's harnessed in the right way and if it's used appropriately, not just using, truth as, as a ticket to say whatever I wanted to whenever I wanted to, that was not in a kind or healthy or constructive way. So I think that understanding your sin proclivity or virtue. And then the other piece, when you dive into the spiritual side of the Enneagram, is that it offers 3 kind of like cardinal spiritual practices: silence, solitude, and stillness. And they're grouped based on your triad. And so for the 2, 3, 4, their spiritual practice is solitude. For 5, 6, and 7, there's a silence. And for the 8, 9, and 1, there's a stillness. And again, it's one of those things that is dynamic. Like as an 8, I still need silence and solitude in my life, but stillness is really my chief spiritual practice, in the sense that it is finding, sometimes it's physically a still place with myself and before God, of like, okay, I'm going to stop this fast paced moving about, way that I interact with the world and really show up to hear what it is that you have to say, where it is that you want me to be. And so I think that those are 3 ways to really kind of begin that journey of reconnecting with yourself and with God, those spiritual practices. And those are practices that you do them, your whole life until the day you die. And they continue to be so rich in what you learn in different seasons and the gifts that they offer. So yeah, those 3 spiritual practices I think are really key when it comes to whatever it is, whether you're in a stage of like really kind of figuring things out, reconnecting, or whether you're in a season of really looking for what's next in terms of growth.
I love that. And so those are silence, solitude, and stillness, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's so good. I feel like I need to spend a while thinking about that. That's really good. Um,
Okay.
so I know that the Enneagram can be really powerful in our other relationships as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I would love to know, like, I mean, what does this look like in your life? Like, the more that you've learned about yourself, the more that you've learned about the Enneagram, how has this affected your relationships?
I think the biggest thing is it's helped me to have so much compassion for other people. And really, a lot of that does start with yourself, having compassion the way that you show up in the world, whether it's, whether you're showing up in a good space or whether you're showing up with these really adaptive strategies that are unhealthy. It's like, that was a way that you figure out how to survive in the world. But looking at other people through that lens of compassion has really helped my relationships. And with the Enneagram, you begin to understand their unique challenges, their weaknesses. You understand their core motivation, what their needs are, what they fear. And it just helps you really stay out of judgment and in compassion. One example that I give, I have a lot of ones in my life, and I love my one friend so much. I also have a sister who's a one, but sometimes ones can really hurt my feelings. And I'm pretty I don't get my feelings hurt a lot, but ones know how to do it. And when they do it, it's like, dang, that really stung. And so for ones, it has really helped my relationship with my friends and with my sister when I remind myself, I'm like, okay, this little pang of criticism that I felt from them, I need to let it roll off my back because that is not how they meant to come across. And when I so the type ones, they have a really intense inner critic, and we all have an inner critic, but theirs is ruthless, never nice about anything. And so when I can remember that and be like, okay, you know what fraction of criticism I just felt here is like a drop in the bucket compared to what they live with every day. It gives me so much compassion for them. And it also helps me not take it personally, knowing that ones are that's just the way that they see the world. They see the world black and white, right and wrong, good and bad. And they really are just trying to make things better, that it's not some personal affront to me. So that's just a small example of ways that it's really helped. But yeah, I think as you continue to grow and learn about yourself and other people, you take things a lot less personally and realize that it's probably more about someone else's wounding. And yeah, it does still hurt, but a lot of times that helps to not take it so personally.
Mm-hmm. I think that for me, it's been, I have a lot of threes in my life. And then also, Carl, my husband, is a five. And so there are a lot of people in my life that are, I mean, I have a lot of people in my life that are great. I also have some eights. I don't know. I have a lot of people in my life that are really great at talking about their feelings. But then I also have a lot of people in my life who it's not their first language. And so that has been so helpful to understand that there are some friends in my life that, really spending a lot of time digging deep in their feelings isn't comfortable for them and is something that they really have to practice. And that's again, it's just not their first language. And so it helps me translate a little bit and it helps me understand, just give some context, I think. But that's been so helpful and just in all different ways to understand what my friends are naturally best at. And then also what they're naturally not best at. It really does. It just gives some context to who they are and why they might react in a certain way to something. And it just helps me speak to them and then also understand them in a way that's more true to, I guess, more effective.
Yeah. Well, and that's another piece too, that it's that's the gift that being in relationship with other types offer. You as a two are able to give them that language for their feelings when normally they wouldn't have it. And it would be so difficult. It's funny, you said you have a lot of threes in your life. I have a lot of threes in my life too. And I love them dearly. And also as an eight, I sometimes look at them and I'm like, oh my gosh, the inauthenticity here. It's just appalling when they're living in just such a bad space. And I realize that's a huge growth opportunity for me of get out of judgment and have some compassion for them. Cause man, they've operated their whole life on this stage of performance. And I don't know, maybe it was their childhood. Maybe it's just maybe it wasn't, maybe it's just the way that they are in the world. But for some reason they have this belief that who they are, their worth as a human is contingent upon, their performance and how they show up. And so it's no wonder they would show up like this in the world, but that's also for where me as an eight, I get to have I have a lot of opportunity for growth and compassion there. But yeah, like you said, I like that second language thought that it's that's not something anyone can learn a second language. And I think the older we get, actually, I can tell you the older we get, the harder it is. Learning Mandarin was not easy, but it's possible. It's absolutely possible. And the more that you do it, the more instinctual it becomes. It's kind of I always think about going to the gym. like working out is never easy, but it's not as bad as it is when you've like taken months off and you just go back for the first time and you're so sore and you can barely move the next day. If you keep going day after day, you build muscle memory, you build strength. And so like, no, you're never going to go and be like, oh, that was so easy, but it's just not going to be as taxing and it's not going to be as difficult. So
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. Talk to me about marriage, because I know that there have been so many conversations about how the Enneagram is helpful in marriage. And it's honestly not like a path I've walked down super far. Like, Carl knows about the Enneagram, likes the Enneagram. We like talk about it some, but it hasn't been a big thing in our marriage. And so I'm excited to hear how it is helpful and talk to me about the Enneagram in marriage.
Yeah. I mean, I think the compassion, again, we've already talked about that. That's the first piece, but especially when you're in that deeply of a connected relationship with someone, understanding what their basic needs are, what their core fears are, what drives them really helps you I think when you enter into conflict, it really helps you approach that more from a collaborative standpoint. And rather than like dying on a hill of like, I want this or I need this, it really helps you understand the other person and where they're coming from and why they're coming from that place. Again, this is kind of another layer of the Enneagram once you dive into it. But there are stances. So they're broken down into the Enneagram is kind of all divided into like subcategories of 3. And so there's 3 stances: the assertive, dependent, and withdrawn. And I think that this, and I'll break it down a little bit more, but this is so helpful, especially when it comes to conflict. The assertive stance, that is the 3, 7, 8, kind of self-explanatory. They're very bold and assertive. At times, this can translate and be kind of aggressive when they're wanting something or they have a goal that they're working towards. And so my husband and I, we are type 3 and 8. We have very direct conflict. There's not a lot of passive aggressiveness. It is just like, hey, I'm pissed that you didn't take the trash out. And now like today's Monday, it's trash day. He's supposed to take it out Sunday night. He forgot. I was pissed this morning. I told him, I was like, hey, you forgot the trash again. And I'm mad. Instead of just like
around the bush,
clanging around the kitchen and like, passive aggressively being like mad about the trash. And it was also like, hey, I'm mad about this. Can you please like set a reminder on your phone so you don't forget? So that's kind of how that type shows up in general, but especially in conflict. The dependent is a 1, 2, and 6. They are less assertive and they rely more on their relationships to get what they want and need. And this isn't like in a manipulative way. Every type absolutely can be manipulative in getting what they want, but this is not that. But they just kind of like use the pulse of their relationships to kind of navigate through conflict and rough waters. Ones fall into this category, but a lot of times people will say that ones can also flip to that more assertive side too. So they kind of flip between the two. And then the withdrawing stance is the 4, 5, 9. And this type, they're not conflict averse, but they definitely need time to think, to plan how to best pursue the goals of the relationship or the situation or whatever it is at hand. And so I think that's a really helpful. It's also helpful to, again, like using us as an example, as a 3 and an 8, sometimes we just need to like let it go. And because we're both assertive, like we just need to walk away and we just be like, okay, we're not gonna argue about this. This is really dumb. This is the trash. Like it happened. Let's get over it. And so I think it's important to know that. And then sometimes, if you're in the withdrawing stance, like maybe the work is to like step up and say something about it, that day instead of waiting 5 days or 2 weeks or never saying anything about it. So I think that's another really helpful way when you're in marriage to really utilize the Enneagram.
I like that. I like that a lot. There are a million quotes like this, but just the idea that everyone who you see, everyone in the world has a story, or everyone in the world has something going on. Everyone in the world is going through something, and just kind of interacting with each other with that in mind. I think that that's one of the reasons I like the Enneagram so much, is because the more that, and I think this is probably true for all of us, but the more I understand someone, the more compassion I have for them.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to just see someone from the outside and I think either like assume the best or assume the worst. Like we either assume that they have no problems and everything that they do is perfect and their life is perfect and I'm the only one who's a mess. Or we assume that their actions are, what they said was they were trying to be hurtful or they were trying to be mean or something like that. And I think neither of those are true. Everyone's going through something. And most of the time, people are really doing their best. But
Yes.
we all have different stuff that we're going through. And so knowing that like a whole section of the population has just this brutal inner critic helps us be so much more gentle with each other.
Yes. Yes.
Or knowing that
Yeah.
like, giant sections of the population have a really hard time talking about their feelings and are like, have a lot of fear surrounding facing their emotions. I think a lot of people feel that way. Is just helps us be a lot more. I think even if you don't know what someone's type is, knowing about the different types and knowing like what just is imagining what people could be going through, just helps us approach each other so much more gently. And I think that that's really powerful.
Yeah. I think, like you're saying, I think Brene Brown is the one, I don't remember which one of her books, but it's something about people are hard to hate up close, move in. And I always think about that when people do something that just like really irks me or just like rubs me the wrong way. I'm like, you know what? They either like completely didn't mean that, or it's more telling of something that's going on inside of them that's really painful or a really hard experience that they're living through and walking through. And like you said, it's like people don't wake up every day and like, you know what, I'm just going to be a really terrible version of myself. Like people are really doing the best that they can. And yeah, sometimes like the best that I can do every day is not great. But you know what, I'm still waking up and I'm still giving it my all.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're right. Like that's really where compassion comes in. And when we, I think about it too a lot of times. It's like, I want people to give me a break when I don't show up well or when I'm quick to be critical or harsh or unkind. I want people to be understanding and forgiving of me. And so I need to extend that same understanding and forgiveness to them. So yeah, I love that.
Have you found that, as people are trying to figure out what their type is and, whether they're doing it, I think if you're taking a test and you get the results and then you're looking through the descriptions, or if you're just looking through the descriptions, have you found some sort of connection between like the one you really, really, really don't want to be being the one that you are?
Yes, it usually is that one. And that's why people like, I'm not trying to like cast a blanket statement, but a lot of people are not truthful with themselves. My husband, he will tell this story about himself. When he learned about the Enneagram, he's like, oh, I'm a 7. And as a 3, there's a lot of his like behavior that looks like a 7. He's very entrepreneurial, has like hopped from job to job and like done all these things. He's very spontaneous. He can look like a 7 a lot of times, and he is a 3 through and through. And he will say, he was like, oh, I knew it for a long time, but I just didn't want to admit it because of the reality of like the shadow side of each type. And so, yeah, I think that's also part of the gift of the Enneagram is that when you're willing to be honest and truthful with yourself, that is where transformation can start. And it's really the gift of it, but it does require that you're honest with yourself, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier when it comes to identifying your type. If you're in a season where you are just really not being your best self, or if you're in a season where you're just like killing it, you're like 10 out of 10 crushing life every day, it's going to be pretty easy to spot your type. But a lot of us live in that kind of average middle ground space from day to day where it's like, we're kind of doing okay, but we're kind of not. And we, are also employing these adaptive strategies. But yes, I think it's hard to be honest with yourself and others. But a lot of people say that that's how you know your type is the type that you read and you're like, oh, I don't want to be that type. You absolutely are.
Probably are. Yeah. That's definitely how I felt about it too. I was like, that is so lame. I don't want to be that one. Yeah, that's not fun. That's I don't want to be that. And I think that, it was a good reminder for me that everything looks different. Like this provides a really, really good language to use about ourselves and about each other, and like a common language to be able to talk about who we are and where we come from and what we need and how we're feeling with each other.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful. But also like, it doesn't mean there's like a t-shirt that goes with each type that you like have to fit into. And I think that's why I was like, I can't be a 2, because when people talk about it, like the stereotype of a 2 is that you're the one like single-handedly organizing every church bake sale, you know, and like you don't let anyone help you, and you are like this, you know, amazing host that, you know, can cook the best cookies for everybody, and does it all by themselves, and will never ask for help. And I'm like, I could ruin a batch of break and bake cookies. Like, truly, I'm not, like, that's not me. I'm not the one organizing the bake sale. It's like, I'm the last person that would volunteer for that. That I was talking to a friend and she was like, yeah, but like at the church bake sale, would you be like sitting in the back of the room with someone you just met talking about their life until, you know, all hours of the night? And I was like, well, yes, I would definitely be there. Yeah. And so it can look different. And so just because you've seen, you know, everyone's T-shirt looks different, even if they're the same type as you. Everything can come out in different ways, but it is so, I don't know, it is just really helpful to have, I know I keep saying this, but just have some language to be able to describe yourself, even to yourself.
Yeah.
Just to understand, at least a starting point for understanding about kind of who you are and why you do some of the things that you do. It just, when you can have some words to even just explain them to yourself, it makes it so much easier to like move through some of those things and grow and heal and ask for help, and you know kind of where to ask for help. And then also when you're talking to someone else who you're in relationship with and you want to be understood, it makes it so much easier when you actually have some words, especially common words to use to talk about yourself.
Yeah. It's that common language that's so powerful that it's like, you understand this, I understand this.
Do you have any like just last resources that you can point women to who are like, you know, I want to figure out what type I am. I want to learn more about this. I didn't even know about the stances. That was like the first time I'd ever heard of that. So what are some of your favorite Enneagram resources?
Yes. A couple things right off the top of my head. I think the Road Back to You is probably the best Enneagram primer out there. Suzanne Stabile and Ian Cron just did a fantastic job of really describing each type. That's one of my favorite books out there. I think if you're looking for something kind of to bolster relationships, The Path Between Us by Suzanne Stabile, or Becoming Us by Beth and Jeff McCord. And then I also recently read The Journey Onward, and that's another Suzanne Stabile book. And that really dives into a deeper layer of that, kind of incorporates things like the core emotions, the stances, all of that to really help you get a better idea once you know what your type is. That to me too was really transformative in the way that I saw other people and having compassion for them. Those are, I would say, some of my favorite books. There is one called The Enneagram Made Easy. And that's a really, like, if you have kids or if you're looking for something like pretty high level, that's a really good one as well. And then there's a lot, like if you want to deep dive into things, Helen Palmer, Beatrice Chestnut, they have a lot of great books out there, and you can get real deep into that. But then some things in the podcast space, Krista Harden has the Enneagram and Marriage podcast. And so again, if you're looking for something in the relational space, she's also a therapist. She's fantastic. The Typology podcast is Ian Cron's. A lot of people are familiar with that. I think he does a really good job. He interviews people. And so that one's really helpful. I think if you don't know what your type is, you're kind of trying to figure it out, or if you have different types of people in your life that it's like, I just don't understand them, or I want to relate better. It's that type of person talking about their experience and just the way that they operate in the world. So I think those are a couple really great resources to start.
That's so awesome. Okay, we're going to link all of those in our show notes because I want everyone to have access to those. Meredith, I'm so grateful for you. And I love the work that you're doing, and I love the way that you explain this. It's just really easy to understand. It's really relatable, and I'm so excited for your book to come out. So we'll link to that in the show notes, also all of your information. But really, thanks so much for the work that you do and for coming on Girls Night.
Thank you for having me. This is so fun.